Hey guys, it's Daniel. Welcome back.
As someone who's from Toronto and who has stayed at the hotel this situation with Keith Richards took place in, this next story is particularly interesting for me. So as we all know, the Rolling Stones epitomized rock and roll excess, even when it came to drugs, and one of the most famous instances, arguably the most famous instance of the Rolling Stones getting into trouble for drugs, was the situation with Keith Richards in Toronto in 1977. On February 27, 1977, Keith Richards was arrested in Toronto for possession of heroin. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police found 5 grams of cocaine and 22 grams of heroin in Keith Richards' hotel room. He was charged with possession of cocaine and heroin with intent to traffic. He was eventually released on $25,000 bail, but because of the trafficking charge, he faced a minimum 7-year sentence if he was found guilty. The following is the story of what happened in Keith Richards' own words. This is from his biography, Keith Richards' Life. Quote,
"The band was waiting for me in Toronto in early 1977. I put off going for many days. They sent me telegrams, 'Where are you?' We had a gig at the El Macombo Club, which would provide more tracks for our Love You Live album. We needed some days of rehearsal. I couldn't, apparently, extract myself from the rituals of Old Church Street, and I had to get Anita on the road too, which was just as difficult. But finally we flew there on February 24th. The gigs, 2 nights at the club, were scheduled for 10 days later. I took a hit on the airplane, and somehow the spoon ended up in Anita's pocket. They found nothing on me at the airport, but they found the spoon on Anita and busted her. Then they bided their time. They went to great effort to prepare the big bust of me in the Harbor Castle Hotel, knowing that they'd find something, just follow the junkies. They had intercepted a package of stuff I'd sent ahead. Alan Dunn, the longest-serving Stones man, the logistics and transport supremo, discovered later that the regular personnel who worked in the hotel suddenly found themselves working alongside many extra people who had been hired mostly as telephone and television engineers. The police were setting it up. Massive resources against one guitar player. The hotel manager would have known, but of course nobody tipped us off. To save money, Peter Rudge, the tour manager, had taken any personnel off the floor. So the police came straight to the room. Marlon would not normally have let in any policemen, but they were dressed as waiters. They couldn't wake me up. By law, you have to be conscious to be arrested. It took them 45 minutes. I'd been up for 5 days, and I'd had a heavy-duty shot, and I was out. This was my last rehearsal day, and I'd been asleep for about 2 hours. My memory of it is waking up and them going slap slap, 2 Mounties dragging me about the room slapping me, trying to get me conscious. Bang, 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 bang. Who are you? What's your name? Do you know where you are, and do you know why we're here? My name's Keith Richards, and I'm in the Harbor Hotel. What you're doing here, I have no idea. Meanwhile, they found my stash, and it was about an ounce, quite a lot. No more than a man needs. I mean, it wouldn't feed the city, but obviously they knew their stuff, like I knew mine, and it was clearly not the Canadian smack. It had come from England, and I'd put it in the flight case. So they arrest me, take me to this Mountie police station, and it's really not my time of day. They put me through the books and everything, and because of the amount they found, they decided to charge me with trafficking, which is an automatic jail sentence for a very long time in Canada. I said, okay, fine, give me a gram back. Oh, we can't do that. I said, so what are you going to do now? You know I need it and that I'm going to have to get it. What are you going to do? Follow me and bust me again? Is that your game? How are you going to play this? Give me some back till I figure this out. Oh, no. And that was when Bill Wyman came through. Bill was the first one to come around and say, is there anything I can do? And I said, quite honestly, I'm out of it and I need some. And of course, that's not Bill's area, but he said, I'll see what I can do. And he found somebody. We'd been working at the El Macombo Club, so we had a local connection. Bill came through and got some stuff to get me off the hook over the hill. And that was a big risk for Bill, considering the attention I was getting. That was the closest emotional thing I can remember with Bill. The Mounties never did try to bust me again. I was quoted as saying, what is on trial is the same thing that's always been on trial. Dear old them and us. I find this is all a bit weary. I've done my stint in the dock. Why don't they pick on the Sex Pistols? End quote. Yet again, someone was very seriously after me, and the situation was further complicated by Margaret Trudeau, the wife of Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau, moving into the hotel as a Stones appendage, offering a double big tabloid story. The Prime Minister's young wife with the Stones, and you throw in drugs, you're looking at a 3-month run. In the end, it may have played in my favor, but at the time, it was the worst combination of circumstances. Margaret Trudeau was 22, and Trudeau was 51. When they got married, it was a bit like Sinatra and Mia Farrow, the power and the flower child. And now Trudeau's bride, and this was exactly their 6th wedding anniversary, was seen walking in our corridors in a bathrobe. So then the story was that she had left him. She had, in fact, moved into the room next to Ronnie, and they were hitting it off really well, or as Ronnie put it so nicely in his memoirs, we shared something special for that short time. She flew to New York to escape the publicity, but Mick flew to New York as well, so it was assumed they were an item. Worse and worse. She was a groupie. That's all she was, pure and simple. Nothing wrong with that, but you shouldn't be a prime minister's wife if you want to be a groupie. I'm out on a bond of many dollars, but they took my passport and I'm released only to the hotel. So I'm trapped and I'm still waiting to see if they're going to jail me. They're shooting fish in a barrel. At another hearing, they added a charge of cocaine possession and revoked bail, but we got off that on a technicality. I would have loved to have dared them to put me in jail. It was all BS. They didn't have the balls. They weren't feeling confident. The rest of the band left Canada out of caution, and quite wisely so. I was the first one to say, get out of here. They're only going to involve you. Let me take the heat. It's my heat. It was quite likely that jail time was on the cards. I was facing a probable 2 years, according to my lawyers. It was Stu who suggested that I should use the waiting time to put down some tracks of my own. Put something down to remember the man by. He hired a studio, a beautiful piano, and a microphone. The rest has been doing the circuit for a while. KR's Toronto bootleg. We just did all the country songs, nothing different from what I'd do any other night, but there was a certain poignancy about it because at the moment, things looked a bit grim. I played the George Jones, Hoagie Carmichael, Fats Domino songs I played with Graham. Merrill Haggard's Sing Me Back Home is pretty poignant anyways. The warden is taking the prisoner down the hall to his execution. Once again, it was Bill Carter who came to my rescue. Carter's problem was that in 1975, he had assured the visa-issuing authorities that there was no problem with drugs. Now I'm busted in Toronto for drug trafficking. Ex-Secret Service agent and security specialist Bill Carter had flown straight to Washington. Not to visit his friends in the State Department or Immigration, who had told him I would never be allowed into America again. Rather, to the White House. First, he had assured the Canadian court when he posted my bond that I had a medical problem and that I needed to be cured of my heroin addiction. He made the same case to his contacts in the White House where Jimmy Carter was president, using all the political muscle he could work, talking to one counselor there who was Carter's drug policy man, fortunately charged, at the time, with finding solutions more effective than punishment. He told them that his client had fallen off the wagon, had a medical problem, and Bill was asking their mercy to grant me a special visa to come to the US. Why the United States? Well, there was only one woman who could cure me, and she was called Meg Patterson, and she did a black box cure with electric vibrations. She was in Hong Kong and needed a sponsored doctor in the United States. These were the lengths Bill Carter went to, and it worked. Miraculously, his White House contacts instructed immigration to grant me a visa, and he got permission from the Canadian court for me to fly to the US. We were allowed to rent a house in Philadelphia, where Meg Patterson would treat me every day for 3 weeks. From there, after her prescribed cure, we moved to Cherry Hill, New Jersey. I was not allowed to move outside a 25-mile radius from Philadelphia, which included Cherry Hill. A deal worked out between the doctors and lawyers and the immigration department. Although I was getting clean under Meg Patterson's care, a cure imposed by the authorities lacked conviction in my heart. Meg's method was supposed to be the painless way out. Electrodes attached to your ear released endorphins, which theoretically canceled the pain. Meg also believed in alcohol, in my case Jack Daniels, which is a strong brew, as a substitute, a diversion, let's say. So I drank heartily under Meg's maternal guidance. I was quite interested in Patterson's method. It did certainly help, but it was still no fun. After it was finished, in a matter of 2 weeks or so, immigration announced that they'd have to monitor me for another month. I'm clean, alright, and I'm getting antsy and restless, stuck in this nice suburb. I felt like I was in jail and I just got sick of it. Meg Patterson made her report to the State Department and Immigration that I was following the medical treatment, and to cut a long story short, I got reinstated. As far as immigration was concerned, the slate was wiped clean. No offenses appeared on my record. Times were different then. There was more of a belief in rehabilitation than there is now. The visa, which was originally a medical visa, overrode everything. It was extended from 3 to 6 months, from single to multiple entries. There were waivers for touring and working on the grounds that I was confirmed to be clean and curing myself. As you clean up, you go up another level and another level until you get the full clean status, according to my understanding of it. And I've always been very grateful to the US government for allowing me to come to America to get the help to come off the stuff. So we sprung Marlin and moved out of New Jersey to a rented house in South Salem, New York called Frog Hollow, a classic colonial-style wooden house, although haunted, according to an increasingly haunted Anita, who saw the ghosts of Mohican Indians patrolling the hilltop. It was down the road from George C. Scott. He used to crash regularly into our white wooden fence, driving at 90 miles an hour. But that's where we ended up, near Mount Kisco in Westchester County. It was at this time that Jane Rose, who is now my manager, started unofficially looking after me. Jane was mostly working for Mick, but Mick had asked Jane to stay in Toronto and help me when everybody left. And she's still here, my secret weapon 30 years later. I have to say that during the bust in Toronto, in fact, all busts, Mick looked after me with great sweetness, never complaining. He ran things, he did the work, and marshaled the forces that saved me. Mick looked after me like a brother. Jane described herself at this time as the meat in the sandwich, between Mick and me. She witnessed the first sign of a rift between us when I came out of the junk fog and the mental fog that accompanied it, and started to want to take care of business, at least musical business. Mick would come up to Cherry Hill and hear my selection of tracks for Love You Live, which we'd been working on all this time sporadically, and he'd go back and complain to Jane about them. Collaboration was giving way to struggle and disagreement. It's a 2-disc album, and the result is that one disc was Mick's and the other was mine. I started talking about things, about business, things we had to settle, which I imagine for Mick was unfamiliar, shocking. I'd kind of risen from the dead after the will had been read. But this was a skirmish, a sign only of what was to come in later years. It took 19 months from the bust in March of 1977 in Toronto to the trial in October of 78. But at least now I was living in striking distance of New York. The visas were, of course, not without conditions. I had to travel back and forth to Toronto for various hearings. I had to prove that I'd cleaned up and had been following a steady course of rehab, and I was obliged to attend psychiatric evaluation and treatment in New York. I had this doctor in New York City who would say, "Oh, thank goodness you're here. I've been dealing with other people's brains all day." She would open the drawer and pull out a bottle of vodka. She'd say, "Let's sit here for half an hour and have a drink. You look all right." I'd say, "I'm feeling pretty good." But she helped me. She was doing her job. She made sure the program worked. The Canadian heroin case went on and on. I was flying up and down from New York to Toronto on a weekly basis, but it didn't stop me from taking the stuff at the time. There was a little airport out of which I flew back to New York from Toronto on a private plane. On one of these trips in the airport before taking off, I went to the John to have a fix. I'm in the cubicle, and just as I'm cooking up the spoon, from beneath the door I see this ominous set of spurs. There's a Mountie officer there. He wants to take a pee, and he's going to be smelling the dope. It's just flaring up, clink clink, and I'm a goner. But, miraculously, he walked out. How many chances have I got left? I'd pulled my string too long. There was already a permanent black cloud of expecting the stuff to hit the fan. I'm facing 3 charges: trafficking, possession, and importing. I'm going to be doing some hard time. I'd better get ready. Which is one of the reasons I finally cleaned up. I didn't want to cold turkey in jail. Also, attached to the junk as I was putting myself slowly into a position where it would be impossible to move around the world and work. There was a tour coming up in 1 month in June of 1978 for Some Girls. I knew I'd had to get clean for it. Jane Rose, who is now my manager, had been asking me, "When are you going to get clean?" And I'd say, "Tomorrow." I had done it the year before, screwed up and got hooked again. And this was the last time. I didn't want to hear about another dope deal. Been there. You get about 10 years and you stop. You take your medal and retire. And Jane stuck with me, bless her heart. The old Jugs, which is her nickname, came through. It must have been horrendous for her. Far worse for me. But for her to witness what goes on when you're climbing the walls, going bananas, how could she plow through that? At this time, the Stones were gathered at Bearsville Studios in Woodstock, New York, to rehearse for the tour. I was at home with Anita. This is Jane's recollection of when I gave up heroin. Quote, "I had basically become the courier. I would bring money or drugs from New York to Westchester County for Keith. He still wouldn't clean up, and his habit was bad now, and he would not admit it, and I couldn't stand the calls to Westchester anymore. I went up there, and Antonio and Anna Marie were there, friends of Anita's who lived in Keith's apartment, in Rue Saint-Honoré in Paris. Antonio later became Antonia. So they were there in the house, and Keith was waiting for money and drugs. Anita was there too. I went up to the house, and they said, 'Where's the money?' And I said, 'I don't have the money.' I said, 'It's in New York.' They flipped out, and Anita got in the car. She was furious. And I said, 'Keith, today is tomorrow.' Because he was always saying, 'Tomorrow I'll clean up.' And this was right before the tour in May. He and Anita had a huge fight later that day. Keith went upstairs. He was furious. Anna Marie and Antonio looked at this Jewish chick from New York and said, 'This girl is going to be dead. How could she come out here without the money?' Then there was silence. And I went upstairs to the bedroom, the 4-poster bed, and I said hello. and he had kicked off his shoes and said, "Okay, I'm going to do it. I've got my machine, I'm going to kick." And I said, "Want to go to Woodstock? That's where the rehearsals are going to be. Get away, do it. I'll go with you." After 3 hours, he said, "Okay." So we were getting ready to go before Anita came back because I just knew it had to be that way. And she came back before we left. There was a big row and somebody went flying down the stairs. In the end, Keith sat in the car and we went to Woodstock. Anita had her drugs or her money. And Keith went to Woodstock and he went cold turkey with his machine. Mick and Jerry Hall came up for 2 days to be there with me. And I stayed with him 24 hours. I stayed in the room, I was there. I don't know for how many days after that or if I even talked to anybody. I had a conviction that he was going to get better. I just believed in him. In 1978, my trial was finally heard in Toronto in October of 1978. We knew it might sink us all, but in the face of it, some of us were looking on the bright side. "I don't think it's going to be as bad as that," said Mick. Mrs. Trudeau was implicated in the situation, and so the longer the process went on, the clearer it was that the Canadian government wanted to wriggle out of it. The Mounties and their allies were thinking, "Oh great, wonderful job. We've delivered him to the Canadian government with a hook in his mouth." And the Trudeaus were thinking, pal, this is the last thing we need." There were 500 to 600 people outside every time I turned up in court, chanting, "Free Keith, free Keith." And we knew that the enemy camp, if you want to call the Canadian government at the time the enemy or persecutors, were unsure of their footing. Whereas I didn't mind. I figured the harder they hit me, the easier I would get out. The Mounties, or at least the prosecution, didn't want to wriggle out at all. But as Bill Carter observed, in almost every one of these cases brought against us at the time, the law had its hands dirty. They knew I wasn't trafficking, but they wanted to railroad it through to a jury to get a long and historic jail sentence. They made a mistake. Look at Keith Richards. He's not selling drugs, he's got all the money he needs. The allegation of trafficking just to get a stiff sentence is absurd. He's a hopeless addict. He has a medical problem. My lawyers wrote a report that showed that according to all legal precedent and local case histories, if I weren't Keith Richards, I would probably have gotten no more than a suspended sentence. Only at last minute did they change the trafficking charge to possession, adding a cocaine charge. But this shift weakened and exposed them, exposed more about the Canadian government than anything to do with, oh, guess what? Keith Richards is on smack. What else is new? The Trudeau's implication in the whole scenario at the hotel, that was another thing, which was more buzzworthy, so one thing overwhelmed the other, so to speak. I certainly felt that whatever the charge was, I was definitely in way above my head or below it, any way you look at it. Who knows what really goes on? It's called politics. It's one of the scrubbiest games in town. So we knew it was dead in the water. Now it was, how long will it take for them to get me out of here? They walked themselves into it, now they don't want to know about it, and how will they find their way out? We were waiting to watch the Canadian government melt. The Canadian people were the ones that got me off the hook. If they had hit me hard and quick, they probably could have got me just for importing. But when it came to court, clearly the new judge had said, "Get this thing off the hook. We don't want any more to do with this. It's causing us more embarrassment and money than it's worth." On the day of reckoning, I arrived in court, this courtroom that had the air of England in the 1950s, with a portrait of the Queen hanging strangely on the wall. The actor Dan Aykroyd, who I'd met when we were doing Saturday Night Live just before this, was on standby as a Canadian and as a character witness. The producer of SNL, its Canadian founder, who still produces it, Lorne Michaels, spoke in court about my role as a slinger of hash in the Great Cultural Kitchen. He did a very elegant job of it. I was not in the slightest intimidated by the court. I knew by now that they had a real problem. I knew too from other moments like this that most of the governments of the world were out of touch with their subjects, and that's what I knew I could exploit. Sometimes you can smell defeat even with all of that artillery arranged against you, and this was one such occasion. The verdict was guilty, but the judge concluded, "I will not incarcerate him for addiction and wealth. He must be freed," said the judge, "to get on with his treatment with a condition. He will perform a concert for the blind." Very intelligent, I thought. The most Solomon-like judgment that had been handed down in many a year. And this was to do with a blind girl who had followed the Stones everywhere on the road. Rita, my blind angel. Despite her blindness, she hitchhiked to our shows. The chick was absolutely fearless. I'd hear about her backstage, and the idea of her thumbing in the darkness was too much for me. I hooked her up with the truck drivers and made sure she got a safe lift and made sure she got fed. And when I was busted, she actually found her way to the judge's house and told him this story. And this is how he arrived at the concert for the blind. The love and devotion of people like Rita is something that still amazes me. So, a way was found. Once you're a junkie, your smack's your daily bread. You don't really get off anymore that much. There's junkies that keep upping their dosage, and that's why you get ODs.
To me, it just became maintenance. It was to set the trend for the day. Then came all those agonizing moments when there was a drought on and the old lady's going, "I want some stuff." "So do I, honey, but we've got to wait." Waiting for the man. When there was a heroin drought, it was a bit rough. They really used to put the screws on. There'd be people in the room in dire straits throwing up. You'd be treading over bodies, and there's sometimes really no drought. It's only to jack the price up. And it doesn't really matter how much money you've got. I'm not going to say, "Do you know who I am?" I'm just another junkie. When there's none of the stuff at all, then you've got to go down to the pit, and you know it's going to be like a pool of piranha down there. It happened to me a couple of times on the east side of New York City and in LA. We knew the trick. You'd score upstairs, and on your way down, the other bunch would take it back off you again. Most of the time, you'd hear it going on while you were waiting for it. The thing was to leave quietly, and if you saw anybody outside, because you never knew if it was going to happen or not, usually you'd give them a kick in the balls. But a couple of times, okay, let's go for it. You cover me. You stay down there, and as I come down with the stuff, I'll go bang, and they'll go bang, and then you go bang. Shoot out the light bulbs, and put a few bullets around, and do the run, sparks flying. Then, with a bit of luck, we're out of there. The statistics are well on your side against being hit when you're a moving target. If you look at the odds, 1,000 to 1, you're going to win. You have to be very close, and you have to have a good eye to shoot out a light bulb. And it's dark. Flash, bang, wallop, and get out there. I loved it. It was real OK Corral stuff. Only did it twice. It was a very time-consuming routine. I wake up in the morning, and the first thing is go to the bathroom to have a shot. You don't brush your teeth, and then, oh, screw it, I've got to go to the kitchen and get the spoon. Those stupid rituals that you go through. Last night I should have brought us spoons up so I didn't have to go down to the kitchen. Every time it got progressively harder and harder to kick. And the desire to go back on the minute you were off got stronger. Oh, just one. Now with that I'm clean. Just that one fatal more celebration is a killer. And on top of that, you've come out of it, you're off the stuff, but all your friends are junkies. If somebody cleans up, that somebody has escaped the circle. And whether they like you or love you or hate you or not, the first thing they want to do is pull you back in. This is real good stuff here. Certain pressures within junkiedom have it that if somebody cleans up and actually stays clean, it's like they failed somehow. Failed at what? I don't know. How many cold turkeys can you go through? It's ludicrous, but you never realize it when you're on dope. Several times on cold turkey, I was convinced there was a safe behind the wall that was full of the stuff and it had everything ready to go. Spoon and all. And finally, I'd crashed out, and when I woke up, I'd see bloody fingernail marks down the wall where I'd actually been trying to get in. Is this really worth it? In fact, my decision then was, yep. I can be as big-headed as Mick and flightly and everything, but you can't do that when you're a junkie. There are certain realities that come into play that keep your feet in the gutter even lower than you need to be. Not even on the sidewalk, in the gutter. And obviously, that was the period when Mick and I went off on almost perfect 180s. He had no time for me in my supposedly stupid state. I remember being at the disco once in Paris, and I was to meet the man, and I was sick. People were dancing around little glitter balls, and I'm under the benches just hiding and throwing up because the man hasn't arrived. And I'm also wondering, will he fund me under here? If he does arrive, he might look around and back off. I was in a distressed frame of mind, let's put it like that. Luckily, he did find me. But being in that position and at the same time you're like numero uno in the world, you realize where you've sunk to. Just getting yourself into that position leaves a sense of self-loathing that takes a while to rub off. You'd do anything for that stuff. But I'm my own man, I'd say. Nobody can tell me what to do. And yet you realize you've put yourself in a position where you're in the hands of a dealer, and that's disgusting. Waiting for this guy and begging him? That's where the self-loathing comes in. Any way you look at it, junkies are people waiting for the man. Your world gets diminished to dope. Just that by itself becomes the whole world. Most junkies become idiots. That's really what finally turned me around. We've only got one subject in mind, which is the dope. Can't I be a little more smart about it? What am I doing hanging around with these losers? They're just boring people. Worse, a lot of these are very bright people, and we all kind of know that we've been hoodwinked, but then why not? Everybody else is hoodwinked by something, and at least we know we're fooling ourselves. No one's a hero just for taking dope. You might be a hero for getting off it. I love that stuff, but enough was enough. Also, it narrowed one's horizons, and eventually all you know are junkies. I had to move to broader horizons. You only know all this, of course, once you've gotten out of there. That's what that stuff does. It's the most seductive thing in the world.